Welcome to Evil Done Badly, the worst true crime podcast on the internet. We're going to a place we've never gone before this week, and I'm quite excited about it. This week we're going to be offending the fine working men and women of the land down under. We're going to New South Wales, Australia. And that's where I'm told all the scary, deadly creatures are. But just let me tell you this. Neither crocodiles, nor snakes, or big hairy spiders are anywhere near as scary as this crazy bitch we're about to talk about here today. We're going to talk about Katherine Knight and the poor, unfortunate, defenseless men who were unlucky enough to hook up with her. But before we discuss this fucking nutcase, let's grab a beverage, hold on to our muscular arses, and let's hear the theme song. As usual, we'd like to say thanks to the guys over at the Wide World of Paranormal Investigations and Ridiculous Thrifter groups over on Facebook for their continued support of this lame podcast. Despite their taste in podcasts, they are very cool guys and have amassed quite the following for themselves. So, get on over there and check them out if you haven't already. Now let's get back to the show. Katherine Knight was born in 1955 to her mom and her fuck buddy. Her mom was a floozy, and they had to leave town to avoid the harassment of the angry mob of townspeople. It was a different time back then. Their angry mobs were totally different than the angry mobs of today. Instead of torches and pitchforks, today's mobs, well, they're armed with, Twitter screenshots and lawsuits and stuff like that. And they'd also like to speak to your manager. Anyway, Katherine's new dad was a violent alcoholic and would sexually assault her mom anytime he felt like it. Katherine had to hear all about it, and she wound up a little warped by it all. She also had a whole bunch of siblings and half-siblings, and she claims to have been sexually assaulted by most of them. Oddly enough, she doesn't claim that her dad had his way with her, for whatever that's worth. But anyway, if half of any of this shit is true, she had a terrible upbringing, and her being warped, well, that's probably a gross understatement. According to her, this was all a normal occurrence by the time she was 11 years old. Kathy was a model high school student who won awards for her good behavior. Apart from being a bully and assaulting a child with a weapon, and injuring the odd teacher here and there, she was usually pretty well behaved. Well behaved maybe, well educated, no. She left school at 15 and didn't have a clue how to read or write. How she won an award for anything is anybody's guess, but my guess is these awards are some kind of bribery, and it goes something like this. Hey Katherine, you didn't hurt anybody today. You win a prize, here, have a trophy. I mean, it's a bowling trophy, but it's still pretty neat, right? Good girl, yay, keep it up. Next week, you might win a cabbage. Good little Katherine. Please don't kill anybody. So, she's a bit of a shit disturber, and works at a crap job at a cloth factory for 12 months. She then gets an offer she can't refuse. She accepts a job at a slaughterhouse, slicing out the internal organs of dead animals, and it's right up her alley. I mean, what 16-year-old girl wouldn't want that job? Well, she wants it, and she's so good at it, she gets promoted to boner. I had no idea professional boner was a viable career option, but I guess it is. She actually gets a prize for her bonering, and that prize is, well, her own set of butcher's knives, which she proudly hangs over her bed. I mean, that comes in handy when you need a sharp object in the middle of the night to keep the boogeyman away. But even the boogeyman ain't going anywhere near this crazy cunt because she's too scary. She married her first husband, David Kellett, in 1974. He was already a traumatized alcoholic when he met her, so he was unstable, even before he met Crazy Kathy here. He used to work on trains, but he saw a few too many people get killed by them, and it totally soured his view of the railway system. So, he couldn't keep it together, lost his job, and had to go to work at the slaughterhouse. where there are no dead children. He hooks up with Kathy, and they regularly get into fights with other people, mainly drunken ones, and I get the feeling that Kathy is the one who really wore the brass knuckles in the relationship. I mean, I'd much rather fight this David guy than Kathy. He sounds like a bit of a wuss, but even so. They get married, and the mother-in-law takes little David aside and gives him a little advice on his new nuptials. Quote, "You better watch this one, or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do the wrong thing, and you're fucked. Don't ever think of cheating on her, because she'll fucking kill you." Unquote. So, it sounds like David here is in for a lifetime of wedded bliss. The wedded bliss would last until a few hours later when Kathy tried to strangle little David for not being able to copulate enough times with her. See? She's the professional boner here. David's not on her level. He wasn't able to be boner enough for Kathy. And it didn't take her long to let him know his performance was a little unacceptable. So they had a violent relationship, and Kathy gets really knocked up and fractures his skull with a frying pan. He went crying to the neighbors, and the police got involved and said he should press charges against his wife. Kathy takes him aside and talks him out of it. I assume that means she threatened him. And he went back and told the police he didn't want to press charges. The wedded bliss continued until David ran off to Queensland to hook up with someone less mental. She gets out, and she's really annoyed at David for leaving her. She's so annoyed that she finds a woman with a car and slashes her face. Kathy hops in the car and demands to be driven to Queensland so she can chop David and his mom up into little pieces. The carjacked woman stops at a gas station and runs away. Kathy gets even more annoyed, and she takes a hostage while she's there. And in an effort to sweep up crime on the streets, the police swat her with brooms until she gives up. She winds up back in the loony bin. She confesses to wanting to kill anyone who had anything to do with her husband, including his mechanic, and eventually, somehow, gets released again. And in a really baffling turn of events, David leaves his girlfriend and comes back to Kathy. I did not see that coming. David, you're not that bright, are you? Well, fair enough. I guess being repeatedly bashed in the head with cooking utensils will cloud your judgment a little bit. Or maybe his new girlfriend was even more batshit than Kathy. That's also a possibility. Anyways, she moves back in with David and his mom, with a promise not to cleave them into tiny bits, and she squeezes out another little munchkin. She then proceeds to leave David. She left him. Holy crap, David. Go have yourself a party. That's the best news you'll ever get. Cheers. Go have a beverage. So while David is off celebrating, Kathy moves into public housing because she was declared disabled after hurting her back boning animals. In 1986, she meets 38-year-old David Saunders. What is wrong with you Australian Davids? What about this woman is so attractive to you? And so she just kills David's 2-month-old dingo puppy, just to show him what will happen if he ever fucks around on her. It's time for another beverage. Yeah, and let's stop for a moment and say, boy, she's a proper cunt. She has another baby, beats this David with a frying pan, smashes his face with an iron, and stabs him with scissors. He moves out. He goes into hiding. Kathy grabs her knives and tries to track him down, but he's too sneaky. He does return a few months later to see his daughter, but by then, Kathy has taken out some sort of restraining order against him. And that'll about do it for David number 2. Moving on to the next poor soul. She hooks up with John Chillingworth in 1991, stays with him for 3 years, gets knocked up again, and leaves him for another John number 2, that she's been banging all along. So Kathy moves in with John number 2, who's named John Price, in 1995, and he claims that he's aware of her previous violent tendencies. I think somebody might have sugarcoated it. For fuck's sakes, what is wrong with horny men? I guess she's just that sexy. Apparently, his kids, well, they really liked her. And I mean, what's not to love? And in a surprise twist, John flat out refuses to marry her. Yay! This John is not completely out to lunch altogether. She gets a little put off, like she would, and rats him out to his employer for stealing outdated garbage. Now, he's had this job for 17 years, and she just sells him right down the river. He boots her out of his house and comes crawling back a few months later. She's too sexy to walk away from. She's irresistible. The relationship continued to be tumultuous, and he refused to let her move back in with him. And if there weren't any red flags in these people's courtship already, let me now throw another one on top of this steamy mound of domestic violence lunacy. Whenever John is involved with Kathy, all his friends flat out refuse to have anything to do with him. Yep. They're trying to tell you something there, John. Yeah, you should listen. And in February of 2000, Kathy and John's romance culminates in John being assaulted repeatedly and stabbed in the chest. He leaves her again and takes out a restraining order against her. He's so frazzled, he's so at the end of his rope, that he actually tells co-workers at his new job that if he doesn't show up there the next day, it's because Kathy had killed him, and he's not joking. So they said, if you're that serious about it, maybe you shouldn't be somewhere where she is. And he said, well, I'm afraid for my children, so fair enough. He goes back home anyways. Now, it turns out Kathy had been there, but she's not there now. And while she was there, she sent all the kids in the house off to a friend's house for the night. She's not there, and John gets home and has the place to himself. How he's going to sleep with this crazy bitch on the loose is beyond me. But anyways, Price turns on some whale noises, or a lava lamp or something, and eventually drifts off to dreamland. Somewhere in the night, Kathy quietly slips into the house, takes a shower, and slips into some new black lingerie and heads to the bedroom for sexy time. She wakes John up in her new underpants, and to his disbelief, she's not there to attack him. She's there to get laid. So they get it on, and he falls back to sleep, and she's still awake. Okay, now she's there to attack him. She stabs him, he wakes up, and he tries to run away. She continues stabbing him. He eventually crawls out through the front door, only to be dragged back in by his ankles. It's like the bloodiest episode of Scooby-Doo you ever saw. In total, he sustains 37 wounds and would bleed to death on his own floor. This poor bastard would not make it to work the next day. Just like he said he might not, on account of he might get murdered. And he went, and he got himself murdered. So, Kathy kills John, to the surprise of virtually no one. Even John himself saw it coming. But what happens next is a bit surprising. She proceeds to decapitate poor John, skins him, and hangs his flesh suit from a hook in a doorway in the house. She slaps his meat onto the stove, cooks his flesh up with mashed potatoes and various other yucky vegetables. She prepared 2 place settings and put the names of both of John's children at the table. She then laid down next to John's headless, skinless corpse, took out a handful of pills, took them, and passed out. Now, when John didn't show up for work the next morning, his co-workers were understandably concerned. They go to his place and can't raise anyone after pounding on the doors and yelling through the windows. They notice some blood on one of the doors, and they call in the cops. The police beat their way in at about 10 a.m., find the whole grisly scene with the skinless body, the flesh suit hanging in the doorway, and they find John's head simmering in a pot on the stove with more stinky vegetables. Now, they also find a note on top of Price's body that was written by Kathy before she conked out. She's clearly still pretty much illiterate, and the note is so poorly written that it offends me, so I'm not going to read it here. It's more or less gibberish that accuses dead John of being some kind of incestuous kitty diddler. I don't know why she said that, I guess just to justify her treatment of him or whatever. But anyway, these claims turn out to be unfounded, and Kathy is just completely full of shit, and a Total wacko. So, she survives the half-assed suicide attempt and gets dragged away. And she agrees that she killed him, and she agrees to plead guilty to manslaughter. The court tells her to go fuck herself and charges her with first-degree murder instead. Now, at the trial, they were selecting potential jurors, and they had 60 people, and they told them, hey, this case could get a little icky, and if you don't think you can handle it, if you don't want to be part of it, you can just leave now. And 5 of the 60 of them ran away screaming, and they selected from the remaining people. These remaining people really must have wanted a few days off of work. And though the next day, Kathy just agrees to plead guilty to the first-degree murder charge, and they send the selected jurors home anyways. So, get back to work, y'all. Kathy's lawyers plan to base their defense on her being cuckoo. The shrinks agreed that, yep, she has a whole bunch of stuff wrong with her. But overall, she is sane and should be tried accordingly. She's found guilty because she's already agreed to be, and is sentenced to be drawn and quartered and fed to wild dingoes at the Sydney Opera House. Or at least she should be. Unfortunately, Australia doesn't have any kind of death penalty, and no dingoes will get to feast on her innards. However, she is the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her file actually says, definitely never to be released. And that sounds official enough to me, so she's totally fucked. And that didn't stop her from appealing the sentence in 2006 on the grounds that the punishment was excessively harsh. The judge reminded her that she skinned an innocent man, lopped off his head, tried to feed his meat to his children, and with that, to get the hell back in her cell, and she's gonna be rotting away forever, and she's still there right now. And hopefully, there's no more appeals and she won't ever be getting out. Before we end up here, I have a suggestion. Hey, Australia! You're on an island down there in the corner of the globe, aren't you? You're miles away from anyone else. You've got a whole lot of ocean out there. A whole lot of ocean that you could be disposing of people you don't like in. The ocean's very deep. You can hide a ton of bodies out there before they start washing up on shore anywhere. Maybe you should consider bringing back the death penalty. That's if you've ever had it in the first place. I'm too lazy to look it up. But either way, you should get on that, and you can thank me later. And that'll about do it for the story of Katherine Knight. What a cunt. And there you have it. Another depressing episode of the worst true crime podcast ever, Evil Done Badly, is in the books. If you would like to reach out and suggest future episode topics, we can be reached on Instagram or YouTube at Evil Done Badly, or by email at evildonebadly@gmail.com. So thanks for hanging in there. I'm glad you're here. My name is Dick, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.